We have sent such a clear, unintended, invisible hand type message to a whole generation of kids, not just kids who might have entered.
When Dirty Jobs premiered in 2003, it wasn't just television. It was a revolution in how America saw work. Hosted by the ever-charismatic Mike Rowe, the series took viewers far from boardrooms and red carpets into the heart of the nation's most grueling, unsung professions. From sewer inspectors to roadkill collectors, these were the men and women who kept the country running quietly in the background. Rowe's voice, equal parts humor and humility, made audiences laugh, even as they winced at what they saw. But beneath the surface of entertainment, something deeper was happening. The show's raw realism came at a cost, filming in toxic environments, witnessing accidents, and confronting the sheer emotional weight of labor no one else wanted to see. For Rowe and his team, Dirty Jobs became more than just a show. It was a journey into the unseen corners of the working world. Yet, few could have predicted that behind its success, tragedy was slowly brewing among the people who brought it to life. What most people didn't realize as they laughed along with Mike Rowe's witty commentary was just how perilous every shoot really was. The cast and crew weren't actors in a studio. They were entering unpredictable, sometimes deadly environments. Every episode meant stepping into danger zones, collapsing tunnels, unstable machinery, toxic waste sites, and confined spaces where one wrong move could mean catastrophe. Producers often had to halt filming mid-scene when gas monitors started beeping or when safety teams shouted warnings. Mike Rowe, always calm in front of the camera, came close to disaster more times than anyone knew. In one episode, while working at a wastewater treatment plant, Rowe slipped into a pool of sludge so thick it nearly pulled him under. On another occasion, a piece of malfunctioning equipment exploded mere feet from the crew, sending debris flying toward the camera. Rowe later admitted that some shoots left him questioning why he kept putting himself and his team through it, but he always went back, insisting that if the workers could handle it every day, so could he. For the crew, though, the fear was real. Camera operators developed respiratory problems from exposure to chemicals. Sound technicians fainted from heat exhaustion inside industrial furnaces. And one lighting assistant was hospitalized after falling from a catwalk while trying to get a perfect shot. The laughter and jokes that filled the episodes masked the reality that Dirty Jobs was one of the most dangerous productions on television. Each shoot felt like a gamble between storytelling and survival. And as the seasons went on, that danger began to take its toll, not only on the team's bodies, but on their minds. Every episode of Dirty Jobs introduced viewers to people who lived in the shadows of society's comfort. Men and women who cleaned, repaired, and built the world most took for granted. While Mike Rowe received applause for shining a light on them, their own lives rarely changed after the cameras stopped rolling. Many of these workers had already been fighting uphill battles long before Rowe arrived with a film crew. They faced chronic injuries, mounting medical bills, and the endless uncertainty of seasonal or contract work. After their brief moment on television, some even lost their jobs, either because their workplaces shut down or because the attention drew unwanted scrutiny from regulators or management. A few were celebrated in their small towns as local heroes, but that attention faded quickly, leaving them back where they started, tired, overworked, and underpaid. Rowe often spoke about how emotionally difficult it was to revisit some of these people years later. He found that fame didn't change the harsh truth. Hard work rarely guarantees stability. One crab fisherman featured on the show died in a boating accident just months after filming. A coal miner developed severe lung disease, and despite fan donations, he struggled to afford treatment. The show had opened a national conversation about respecting skilled labor, but many of those who made it possible continued to suffer in silence. Some of them confided to Rowe that appearing on television brought mixed feelings. They were proud to represent their trades, but it also exposed them to ridicule from those who couldn't understand why anyone would choose such dangerous work. For others, it was bittersweet. Seeing their episode air reminded them of colleagues who who didn't live long enough to tell their own stories. Behind every handshake, every muddy laugh, and every segment of television history was a person carrying the burden of survival. Their tragedies didn't end when the camera cut. For many, that was when the real struggle began. To millions of fans, Mike Rowe appeared fearless, witty, and endlessly composed. But behind the camera, the man who made America laugh through the filth was quietly falling apart. Years of non-stop travel, brutal filming schedules, and emotional exhaustion had begun to take their toll. Rowe spent nearly a decade on the road, sleeping in motels, eating truck stop meals, and constantly pushing his body to its limits. Each week brought new dangers: sludge pits, animal carcasses, extreme heat, and unbearable stench. But what wore him down most wasn't the physical grime. It was the emotional weight of what he witnessed. He met fathers struggling to feed their families, mothers working overnight shifts to keep their homes, and proud craftsmen whose trades were disappearing before their eyes. Rowe carried those stories with him, long after the cameras stopped rolling. He once admitted that while the show celebrated hard work, it also forced him to confront the fragility of the American dream. The more people he met, the more he realized how many were barely hanging on. Between filming and press tours, he started experiencing chronic fatigue and bouts of depression. He felt torn between admiration for the workers he showcased and guilt that his success came from their suffering. Fans saw him as a hero of the working class, but he privately wrestled with the question: was Dirty Jobs honoring these people or exploiting them? As the seasons went on, the laughter became harder to fake. Even Rowe's friends noticed he wasn't the same. He began avoiding public appearances, taking long breaks from filming, and questioning whether he could keep doing the show. In interviews, he later described that period as a slow collapse of purpose. The man who had once seemed indestructible was quietly burning out, trapped between his devotion to telling the truth and the personal cost of living it every single day. While Mike Rowe became the public face of Dirty Jobs, the men and women behind the camera were the true unsung heroes, and they bore scars few ever saw. The production team didn't just observe danger, they lived it. Camera operators filmed while standing in knee-deep sludge. Sound technicians worked inches from roaring machinery, and producers often had to crawl into tight, suffocating spaces just to capture the perfect shot. Each episode demanded courage, improvisation, and endurance that no script could prepare them for. But the danger wasn't always immediate. It crept in slowly, in the form of chemical exposure, exhaustion, and mental strain. Some developed chronic respiratory issues from breathing in industrial dust or sewage fumes. Others suffered burns, muscle injuries, and joint problems from carrying heavy gear in extreme conditions. The show's unpredictable nature meant the crew never knew what the next location would throw at them. One week, they might be filming in a pig farm under 110-degree heat, the next inside a freezing cold slaughterhouse or underwater construction site. It wasn't uncommon for crew members to faint, vomit, or collapse from fatigue, only to be revived and urged to continue filming. Yet, despite the hardship, most refused to quit. They believed in the show's mission to highlight real workers. Still, the emotional cost grew heavier. Witnessing the struggles of people who risked everything for survival left lasting marks. A few crew members privately admitted to having nightmares or panic attacks long after filming wrapped. Some couldn't watch the show at all after leaving. It reminded them of the pain, the fear, and the constant sense of danger they endured for years. Rowe himself often praised the team for their bravery, saying they faced the same filth, the same fear, but without the fame. But fame wouldn't have helped. Their bodies and minds had already paid the price. For many, Dirty Jobs was the proudest work they'd ever done, yet also the most punishing chapter of their lives. One that still echoes in their memories long after the final episode was filmed. As the years passed, the Dirty Jobs family endured heartbreak that viewers never knew about. Behind the smiles and banter, real tragedy was unfolding among the people who brought the show to life. Several crew members and featured workers passed away, some in accidents, others from illnesses that could be traced back to the environments they worked in. The reality that Dirty Jobs sought to portray, dangerous, gritty, and unforgiving, proved all too real. Mike Rowe often found himself delivering eulogies or sending quiet condolences to the families of those who had once stood beside him in front of the camera. He would post somber tributes on social media, remembering their laughter, their courage, and their dedication. One of the show's cameramen, who had filmed hundreds of episodes, died after complications from respiratory issues believed to have worsened from years of exposure on hazardous sites. Another crew member suffered a fatal accident while working on a non-televised industrial project shortly after leaving the series. For Rowe, these losses hit like a hammer. He said the hardest part wasn't the danger itself, but knowing the danger had caught up to people he loved. The workers featured on the show didn't fare much better. A handful of them later faced workplace disasters, chemical exposure, or fatal equipment failures. In one particularly haunting case, a man who had proudly demonstrated his trade for the show died only months later doing that same job. When Rowe heard the news, he said it stopped him cold. Those moments haunted him, serving as painful reminders that the line between storytelling and tragedy was paper-thin. Every time the show returned for a new season, there were names missing from the contact list, faces gone forever, memories frozen in old footage. For viewers, Dirty Jobs was an inspiring tribute to hard work. For those who lived it, it became a bittersweet reminder of sacrifice. The laughter, the grit, the camaraderie, they were real, but so was the loss. And for the crew, every death felt like losing a piece of the show's soul, a heavy price for capturing America's most honest work on camera. When Dirty Jobs was abruptly canceled in 2012, the announcement hit both fans and the production crew like a punch to the gut. After 8 successful seasons, countless awards, and a passionate fan base, no one expected the network to pull the plug on one of the most authentic shows ever made. But behind closed doors, the truth was far more complicated than ratings or programming shifts. The show had become physically and emotionally exhausting to produce. Each episode required enormous safety planning, insurance clearances, and specialized equipment just to keep the crew alive in hazardous environments. Discovery Channel executives began to question whether the risk and the cost was still worth it. While the official explanation focused on creative direction, insiders later revealed that burnout and safety concerns played a much larger role. Mike Rowe himself admitted he wasn't surprised when the call came. He was worn down, both physically and spiritually. The long hours, the endless travel, and the cumulative trauma of witnessing so much danger had taken their toll. He felt the show had said what it needed to say, but the way it ended still hurt. There was no grand finale, no proper goodbye, just silence. Crew members were left without closure, scattered across new jobs while trying to process what had happened. Many described the final months as emotionally heavy, with tension thick on set, as everyone sensed the end was near. Rowe tried to remain positive, telling his team they had done something truly meaningful, something that would outlive them all. But he later confessed that watching the show disappear overnight felt like losing a family. For the fans, it was just a TV cancellation. For the people behind the camera, it was the end of an era, a loss of purpose, identity, and connection. The sudden cancellation left deep emotional scars that lingered for years. Even when reruns aired, Rowe couldn't bring himself to watch. He said it felt like revisiting ghosts. What was once a labor of love had turned into a bittersweet memory, buried under the weight of exhaustion and grief. The show that gave dignity to America's dirtiest work had quietly succumbed to the same relentless grind it sought to honor. When the lights went out on Dirty Jobs, Mike Rowe didn't disappear, but he did withdraw. For a while, he vanished from television, retreating from the chaos that had consumed nearly a decade of his life. The silence was intentional. After years of filming in the filthiest corners of America, he needed to breathe, to recover, and to rediscover what it meant to live without a camera following his every move. But as he rested, Rowe couldn't shake the haunting images of the people he had met: the welders, the miners, the fishermen, the forgotten men and women who had become the heart of his mission. He realized that Dirty Jobs wasn't just a show, it was a movement. So instead of walking away, he decided to honor that legacy in a new way. In 2008, before the show even ended, Rowe had quietly started the Micro Works Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to promoting skilled trades and funding vocational scholarships. After the show's cancellation, it became his life's focus. Through the foundation, he raised millions to help Americans pursue careers in plumbing, welding, construction, and electrical work, fields the modern world too often ignored. His message was clear: not everyone needs a college degree to succeed. The country runs on those willing to get their hands dirty. Yet despite this new chapter, the ghosts of dirty jobs still followed him. Whenever he spoke at events or appeared in interviews, people asked about the crew, the workers, the accidents, the tragedies that had never aired. Some of those stories were too painful to revisit. Others he shared with reverence, as reminders of the cost of real work. Many crew members moved on to other projects, though some left the industry altogether, their bodies and minds still bearing the strain of years in the field. A few found new purpose in teaching or safety consulting, inspired by the hardships they'd survived. For Rowe, life after Dirty Jobs became a delicate balance between honoring the past and healing from it. He often said that while the show ended, the mission never did. It evolved into something bigger, a crusade for respect, for gratitude, for a workforce that America had long taken for granted. But behind his smile and advocacy, those closest to him knew he still carried the weight of what the show revealed: that the dirtiest jobs often come with the deepest sacrifices, and no amount of fame could ever wash away what it took to tell that truth. More than a decade after its final episode, Dirty Jobs remains etched in American memory, not just as a TV show, but as a cultural reckoning. It peeled back the curtain on a reality most people never think about, exposing the grit, pain, and heart that built the modern world. But behind the laughter and witty narration lay an unspoken truth. The price of telling that story was immense. Mike Rowe and his team gave everything: time, health, comfort, and in some cases, their peace of mind. What began as a television experiment turned into a spiritual burden. The series changed how people saw work, but it also changed the people who made it. Rowe often reflects on the paradox of Dirty Jobs. It celebrated the dignity of labor, yet it revealed how unforgiving that labor could be. The workers it featured were proud, resilient, and self-reliant, but they were also invisible until Rowe showed up with a camera. When he left, many of them returned to the same dangerous environments, unseen once again. That realization haunted him. It wasn't just about dirty work anymore. It was about how society had built itself on the shoulders of those who toil in silence. Every time Rowe watches an old clip, he says he remembers the faces of the people who didn't make it, the crew members who sacrificed their health, the laughter that masked exhaustion, and the smell of sweat that lingered long after filming wrapped. Dirty Jobs didn't just change television, it reshaped the national conversation about work, pride, and respect. It reminded people that the dirtiest hands often hold the country together. But that legacy came with heartbreak. Some of the tradespeople who appeared on the show have since passed away. Others live with chronic pain or disabilities from the very work that defined them. The crew themselves became symbols of endurance, proof that storytelling can demand as much grit as the subjects it honors. For Mike Rowe, the years since have been a balancing act between remembrance and renewal. Through his foundation, he continues to champion the same cause, funding education and trade programs in memory of those who risked everything to keep the lights on, the pipes flowing, and the engines running. He calls them the real American idols, a title earned not through fame, but through sacrifice. Still, when asked if he'd ever bring Dirty Jobs back, his answer is bittersweet. He's proud of what it accomplished, but deeply aware of what it cost. The show took a toll that can't be measured in ratings or awards. It left invisible bruises on those who lived it. And yet, despite all the pain, the message endures. Dirty Jobs wasn't just about hardship, it was about honor. It was about the people who wake up before dawn, who work in the dark so others can live in comfort, who rarely get thanked but never stop showing up. Their stories, though wrapped in tragedy, carry a lesson that outlasts the show itself. That dignity doesn't come from wealth or status. It comes from effort, perseverance, and the courage to do the work no one else will. In the end, the tragedy of the Dirty Jobs cast isn't just that they suffered, it's that they gave everything to remind the world that every job, no matter how filthy, has worth. The dirt may wash away, but the sacrifice will never be forgotten.